Tonight we look at a city on the edge. Manila, a sprawling metropolis of millions, is no stranger to the devastating power of water. But the floodwaters that have repeatedly inundated its streets are now joined by a different kind of torrent. A deluge of public fury. This isn't just a story about a natural disaster, it's a story of man-made betrayal. Tens of thousands of Filipinos have poured into the streets, their anger directed not at the heavens, but at the very officials elected to protect them. They are protesting what has been dubbed the flood scandal, a massive corruption scheme that allegedly siphoned billions of pesos from critical flood control projects, leaving millions of lives and livelihoods at the mercy of the next typhoon. The images coming out of the Philippines are powerful, and they resonate far beyond the archipelago's shores. They speak to a universal struggle against corruption, a battle for accountability that is being fought in cities and towns across the globe. What happens in Manila matters because it is a test of a democracy's resilience. It is a test of whether ordinary citizens, armed with little more than their voices and a profound sense of injustice, can hold power to account. The world is watching to see if the tide of public outrage can wash away the deep-seated rot of corruption that has plagued this nation for generations, or if the system will hold, leaving the people to brace for the next storm, both literal and political. To understand the fury on Manila's streets today, you have to understand the city's long and troubled relationship with water. Built on a low-lying delta crisscrossed by rivers' estuaries, Metro Manila has always been vulnerable to flooding. For centuries, its residents have lived by the rhythm of the monsoons, the Habagat winds, the Amihan winds. Yet as the city grew, this natural vulnerability was amplified by human factors. Rapid, unregulated urbanization, clogged drainage systems, and the steady sinking of the ground from excessive groundwater extraction. The threat was always present, a known quantity. The problem morphed from an engineering challenge into a crisis of public trust. For decades, successive administrations announced ambitious multi-billion peso master plans. These plans, often funded by international loans and taxpayer money, became opportunities for corrupt officials and their cronies. Contracts for dredging rivers, building dikes, upgrading pumping stations turned into notorious sources of kickbacks. The public grew cynical as projects were announced with fanfare but poorly executed left incomplete or never started, despite funds being dispersed. This history of graft created a deep well of resentment. Every time a typhoon made landfall and the floodwaters rose, Filipinos were reminded of broken promises. They saw substandard materials and hastily constructed flood walls that crumbled. They heard the sputtering of old, poorly maintained pumping stations failing. The link between the corruption in the papers and the dirty water in living rooms became painfully clear. The catalyst for the current crisis was a program launched with immense promise in 2022. It was called Project Noah's Ark, a 300 billion peso flagship initiative aimed to make Metro Manila flood resilient by 2030. It was the government's response to worsening typhoons driven by a changing climate. It included modern pumping stations, dredging of the Pasig River system, a coastal defense barrier in Manila Bay. The name evoked salvation, a promise to lead people to safety. Late 2024, warning signs appeared. Investigative reports by the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism broke the story. Leaked DPWH documents surfaced, and a whistleblower came forward. The reports exposed bid rigging and fund diversion. Allegations: shell corporations owned by relatives of officials landed billions in contracts dredging that never happened. The whistleblower, an engineer, produced falsified progress reports and doctored satellite images. August 2025, the Commission on Audit published its annual report. COA flagged over 85 billion pesos in suspect disbursements. It was the smoking gun. Taxpayers' money turned into private fortunes. The public's response to the Senate testimony was immediate and electric. Spontaneous demonstrations erupted outside the Senate building that very evening, but these were just the initial tremors before the main quake. A coalition of civil society groups, student councils, professional organizations quickly coalesced under the banner Coalición contra Baja at Buwaya, with crocodiles being a Filipino slang term for corrupt politicians. Using social media as their primary organizing tool, they called for a massive, coordinated National Day of Outrage on Friday, September 19, 2025. The hashtag #FloodScandalPH trended globally for days. First, they demanded the immediate resignation and prosecution of all officials implicated in the scandal. Second, they called for the creation of an independent, non-partisan truth commission to conduct a full audit of all flood control projects from the past decade. Third, they insisted on the swift passage of a strengthened Whistleblower Protection Act to encourage others to come forward. Finally, they demanded the immediate reallocation of recovered funds into transparent, community-monitored flood mitigation projects. These were not vague calls for reform, they were specific, actionable demands for accountability. On the morning of September 19th, Manila awoke to a city transformed. Major arteries like EDSA Ayala Avenue Police estimated the crowd in Manila alone peaked at over 300,000, with simultaneous smaller protests taking place in other major cities like Cebu and Davao. The demonstration was overwhelmingly peaceful, a festival of dissent marked by creative placards, satirical street theater depicting officials as crocodiles swimming in money, and impassioned speeches. Walking through the crowd on EDSA felt like walking through the heart of the nation. The air was thick with a palpable mix of anger, hope, and solidarity. We spoke to Maria Santos, a 45-year-old mother of 3 from Marikina, a city perennially ravaged by floods.
Last year during Typhoon Carding, the water reached the 2nd floor of our house. We lost everything. They told us the new floodgates would protect us. Now I know that money, my money, was stolen. I am not here for politics. I am here for my children. I am here because I am tired of being afraid of the rain.
Further down the road, a group of university students chanted slogans. They held up a large effigy of a crocodile wearing a traditional Filipino barong. We talked to Ben Chan, a 20-year-old engineering student.
This is a betrayal of our profession. We study for years to learn how to build things that help people, to build a better country, and then we see our so-called leaders using engineering to steal, to endanger lives. This scandal isn't just about money, it's about the corruption of our future. We have to be here. We have to show them that our generation will not stand for this.
Even the business community, often silent on political matters, was represented. Richard Lim, a small business owner whose warehouse was flooded in 2024, stood quietly holding a simple sign, "Corruption is bad for business."
This isn't about ideology, it's about stability. How can we invest? How can we create jobs when we can't even count on basic public infrastructure? We are all paying the price for their greed.
The flood scandal and the subsequent protests have sent shockwaves through the Philippine political landscape, triggering a crisis of confidence in the current administration. The president's approval ratings, once stable, have plummeted to their lowest point, according to the latest local survey. The scandal exposed deep fissures within the ruling coalition, with allied politicians scrambling to distance themselves. The opposition bloc seized momentum, launching impeachment proceedings against a cabinet secretary. Congress has become a political battleground. Economically, the fallout has been swift and damaging. The Philippine peso has weakened against the dollar. The local stock market plunged. PSI down sharply. International credit rating agencies issued warnings. The direct cost of the stolen funds is just the tip of the iceberg. Uncertainty is chilling investment. Foreign investment is pulling back. Domestic investment is stalling. For ordinary Filipinos, the impact is tangible. Faced with an unprecedented public backlash and a full-blown political crisis, the administration's initial stance of defiance quickly crumbled. After the massive September 19th protest, the tone from the presidential palace shifted dramatically. In a televised address on the evening of September 20th, the president appeared somber, acknowledging the legitimate anger of the Filipino people. He announced the preventive suspension of the 3 cabinet secretaries implicated in the scandal and ordered the Department of Justice to form a special task force to fast-track the investigation. There will be no cover-ups, the president vowed. Let the axe fall where it may. However, these gestures have been met with deep skepticism by protest organizers and the public at large. Critics were quick to point out that similar task forces have been created in the past, only to see cases languish for years in the country's notoriously slow judicial system. The coalition Coalición contra Baha at Buwaya issued a statement calling the president's address a step in the right direction, but insufficient. To put this scandal into a broader context, we spoke with Dr. Clarita Carlos, a retired political science professor and a leading expert on Philippine governance. She argues that the flood scandal is a symptom of a much deeper disease she calls systemic patrimonialism, where the lines between public office and private gain are almost completely blurred. This is not a case of a few bad apples.
It is the entire orchard, that is rotting. The bureaucracy has been structured in a way that facilitates patronage rent-seeking. Public projects are not seen as a service, but as a source of funds to be distributed among political allies.
Another expert, David Santos, the Southeast Asia Director for a global anti-corruption watchdog, frames the issue in terms of accountability. He points out that the Philippines has strong anti-graft laws on paper, but a dismal record of enforcement, particularly against high-ranking officials. The problem is impunity.
Santos stated in a recent interview with CNN, "When officials see that their predecessors and colleagues have gotten away with plundering public funds, it creates a culture where corruption is seen as a low-risk, high-reward activity."
The story of the Manila flood scandal is far from over. The streets of the capital may be quieter now, but the undercurrent of anger remains powerful. What we have witnessed in recent days is a nation at a crossroads. The path ahead is fraught with challenges. The fight for justice will be long and arduous, waged in courtrooms, legislative halls, in the court of public opinion. The powerful forces of the status quo will undoubtedly push back, seeking to delay, deflect, and ultimately deny accountability. The resilience of the Filipino people and their democratic institutions will be tested like never before. This scandal serves as a brutal reminder that corruption is not a victimless crime. Its victims are real people. The family huddled on a rooftop waiting for rescue, the farmer whose crops are washed away, the child who gets sick from wading in contaminated water. The true cost of graft is measured not in pesos, but in human suffering and stolen futures. The mass protests, however, offer a profound glimmer of hope. They have demonstrated the immense power of an engaged and unified citizenry, showing that when people come together to demand better, they can shake the very foundations of power. This awakening is perhaps the most significant outcome of this entire sordid affair, setting a new standard for accountability in the Philippines and serving as a call to action for citizens everywhere fighting for transparency and good governance.